Hello, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. My name is Mu'taz El-Figueri. I'm human rights defender from Egypt, member of the executive committee of the Euromed Rights, and head of the human rights program at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. It's my great pleasure and honor to moderate this webinar, which hosts a group of distinguished speakers. The webinar will focus on the situation in Gaza, responsibilities to protect civilians, and means of accountability for violation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There is no doubt that we are holding this webinar in a very delicate moment. The situation is very grave in the Palestinian occupied territory. We have been following over the last few days appalling massacre and crimes that have been committed in Gaza. There are too many things happening in the world today when it comes to the situation, the human rights situation in Palestine. The International Court of Justice has, in the last week, ordered Israel to halt its operation in Rafah. The prosecutor, the ICC prosecutor, requested arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials in Israel and also in Hamas. There are also recently more European countries recognized Palestine with the move that has been taken by Spain, Ireland, and Norway. The situation continued to deteriorate since the beginning of the war in October and until now. There is lots of questions that have been raised internationally and regionally on the future of the international human rights system and the international humanitarian law and its applicability in an ongoing conflict where there are international actors who have certain interest in this conflict and provide support and protection to Israel, and this is a test for the efficiency of this system, but also it is a challenge for the human rights movement, serious challenge for the international community with lots of repercussion and consequences that will continue years to come. Today we have lots of angles to address in this seminar. The short-term question on protection of civilians in the Palestinian occupied territories. What are the means and policies that are required? What is the prospect for international accountability and the cases that have been addressed or examined right now in The Hague by the International Court of Justice? But also there is a long-term question related to the future of the international human rights regime and international humanitarian law and its ability to deal with crises and conflict and its ability to deliver immediate and timely protection to civilians at risk. We have, as I said, we have a group of distinguished speakers, and we are looking forward to hear their intervention. We have well-known figure in the human rights movement, global human rights movement, Mr. Kenneth Ross, who was the former director of Human Rights Watch, and he's out speaker on the outspoken in the situation in Gaza and the human rights situation all over the world. We have also Mr. Sha'wan Jabbareen. He's the president of Al Haq Foundation, which is one of the oldest human rights organizations in the Arab world. And he is also former Secretary General of the International Federation of Human Rights. And we have Ms. Radia Al-Mutawakkil, the founder and chairperson of Muwatna for Human Rights, which played a very key role in documenting human rights situation and the abuses committed by warring parties in Yemen. And we will have also a fourth speaker who, for some reason, she will not be able to be with us, but she sent a recorded intervention, Ms. Ioni Bilara. And Miss Iuni, she is a politician from Spain, member of the parliament, and former minister for social rights. We will broadcast her intervention during the webinar. We will have 10 minutes for each speaker. Then we will also receive questions and comment, and we'll have a second round of comment from our speakers. I will start giving the floor to Mr. Kenneth Ross. The floor is for you. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be with you. I think this is a very useful seminar because the Gaza conflict has been so partisan, where so many people are pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. And I think that an analysis of what's going on under international humanitarian law allows possibly for some common ground, because humanitarian law is essentially pro-civilian. It doesn't take sides between the two warring parties. And so let me use my 10 minutes to try to quickly run through some of the war crimes that I see being committed using a humanitarian law analysis. And I'll start with October 7th. What Hamas did then was a clear war crime. Humanitarian law prohibits executing civilians. It prohibits abducting civilians. Now, some people try to justify Hamas's actions by saying, well, they were just responding to a long history of Israeli war crimes, such as the settlements. But one, basic premise of humanitarian law is that war crimes by one side never justify war crimes by the other. Now, others say, oh, Hamas was justified because it was resisting the occupation, or it was resisting Israeli repression, or it was resisting apartheid, or resisting the blockade. But again, the justice of one's cause never justifies war crimes. These are basic rules. Now, those rules are important to state because you get similar rationalization to try to defend Israel. Israel says, oh, well, Hamas committed war crimes on October 7th, so why are you complaining about what we're doing in Gaza? But again, war crimes by one side don't justify war crimes by the other. Israel's defense of itself doesn't justify war crimes. So let's look at what concretely Israel is doing. And what's interesting is Israel loves to say, oh, we're different from Hamas. Hamas was, deliberately killing civilians. That's not what Israel does. But then you start looking a little bit more closely, and the distinction isn't quite as sharp as they would have you to believe. So for example, Israel regularly violates the presumption that people or facilities are civilian until proven otherwise. And we've seen that Israel has, attacked universities and museums and, big apartment buildings. These are, clearly civilian facilities. There rarely is ever a real justification for that. Sometimes there's a passing allusion to a Hamas presence, but nothing that would begin to justify, destroying these important facilities. Israel has also, created kill zones where anybody who wanders in there, whether a civilian or not, whether armed or not, is shot. But I think what's ended up being kind of most deadly is that Israel has this time used an algorithm, a sort of artificial intelligence, to decide whom to target. And it essentially is, allowing an algorithm to decide who gets killed. And then to make things worse, it is regularly targeting what it says to be Hamas fighters in their family homes. It says, oh, it's easier to find the fighter there. But if you think about it, the family home is filled with presumed civilians. It's the last place that Israel should be targeting. And then to make it worse, roughly half the bombs they're using are dumb bombs, not precision-guided bombs, which means they have to use a bigger explosive, and they're more likely to harm more civilians. So, these are examples where, this claim not to be, deliberately targeting civilians begins to break down because there at least is a significant indifference to civilian life. And we've seen this much more when we look at some of the other requirements of humanitarian law. So for example, one basic premise is you cannot fire indiscriminately into a populated area. There may be a military target somewhere in there, but that doesn't mean you can decimate a neighborhood. But Israel has regularly been using these huge 2,000-pound bombs. The New York Times months ago already counted 200 cases where these bombs were used. They are utterly inappropriate to use in populated areas. They destroy, blocks of buildings, all to try to get a tunnel underneath or whatever. So this is a classic example of indiscriminate warfare. Even Joe Biden called it indiscriminate bombing. Another rule is that even if you're aiming at a military target, you cannot fire if the harm to civilians will be disproportionate. And the example that I'd like to highlight there, well, two. One is that in attacking, say, the family homes of Hamas fighters, the Israeli lawyers, the military lawyers, are essentially tolerating a ratio of deaths of 15 or 20 civilians for every fighter killed. That is a completely disproportionate ratio. Those are war crimes. Israel has also engaged in disproportionate harm if you look at the way it has taken over hospitals. You may remember, when it initially went into Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, it said that there was a Hamas command center underneath. That command center never emerged. Israel showed a tunnel that it actually may have built during its prior occupation, a handful of weapons, nothing that would justify the huge harm to the civilian population of shutting down a major hospital in the middle of a war when people obviously need a hospital. And to this day, the vast majority of the hospitals are completely closed, or the ones that are functioning still are functioning in very limited ways. Now, the subject of the International Criminal Court action last week is the last war crime that I want to focus on, and that is the starvation of civilians. Humanitarian law requires providing access to humanitarian aid. And Israel has largely ignored that. They've let in drips and drabs of aid, enough to avoid massive death, but not enough to avoid extensive hunger, starvation, and even, according to the World Food Program, famine. And this is where Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, has chosen to initially charge. I think this is just his beginning charges. But this was the easiest case to prove because the evidence is obvious. The evidence is present in the obstruction that Israel imposes at the various land crossings. Today, the Rafah crossing is closed, the Kerem Shalom crossing is barely functioning, and the replacement crossings in the north do not begin to make up for the difference. There's all this publicity around the seaport that was constructed, that now is not even working. The airdrops are just a tiny drop in the ocean compared to what is needed. And so this is clearly a deliberate strategy to obstruct food, promote starvation, as a way of trying to, force Hamas to capitulate, to release the hostages. But of course, Hamas, the guys with the guns, they always find food. It's the civilian population that suffers. And this squeezing of the population to achieve a military purpose is a war crime. And that's why Karim Khan started with that. Now, let me just conclude by noting some of the defenses that Israel tends to put forward. One defense, and you hear this over and over, is human shields. That Hamas is using human shields, or that Hamas is fighting from populated areas. And that's true, that happens. But that does not explain what Israel is doing. It doesn't justify its conduct. First of all, human shields have nothing to do with Netanyahu's starvation strategy. It's just irrelevant. But even in cases of human shields, the Israelis still have a duty not to fire indiscriminately, not to use disproportionate force. So human shields are not a justification for a 2,000-pound bomb. And I think that that's why in his interview after the request for arrest warrants, Karim Khan actually mentioned the 2,000-pound bombs. My guess is that those will be the next war crime charges. Now, the other defense Israel gives is, we're evacuating people. We're trying to protect people. And indeed, there is a duty to, allow evacuation, to promote evacuation. But Israel is tending to do that in an inhumane way. And we can see what's going on, just in Rafah right now, where, 1 million out of the 1.4 million Palestinians who have been sheltering in Rafah have now fled. And, where do they go? I mean, they're putting up tents on the beach where there's nothing to feed them, no sanitation, nothing to receive them. And then, what happened 2 days ago with the bombing of the tent camp is indicative, because we've had many, many cases of people who, move to what they think is a humanitarian air zone or a safe area, and then they get bombed. So what we have is, Israel is providing warning, it's urging evacuation, a supposedly humanitarian gesture, but doing it in an inhumane way, without protecting the people and without providing the humanitarian resources that they need. So, all of this adds up to a military strategy that is replete with war crimes. And, Netanyahu either is engaging in, just a form of collective punishment, or he naively thought he could get away with this. As we just learned yesterday, they were monitoring the International Criminal Court. They were threatening the judge. They were hoping that they could, avoid war crime charges. Or, this may just be part of the plan by the two extreme ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, to create conditions in Gaza that are so abysmal that they create another Nakba. They force 2.3 million Palestinians to flee to Egypt and then never let them back. So it's hard to know what the motives here are, but clearly Netanyahu thought that there would be impunity, that he could get away with this. And fortunately, Karim Khan had the courage to stand up to that. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Kenneth, for this insightful intervention. Well, I will just maybe raise a comment before moving to the next speaker. You ended with that Israel continue to challenge the international community and to feel immune from accountability. This is the contradictions that we have seen in this ongoing conflict, that there is more and more global awareness of what's happening and the massive and flagrant pattern of abuses and grave violations that have been committed. There is also important legal breakthrough in ICJ and International Criminal Court, things that the human rights movement in Palestine was struggling since decades, and we will hear from Shawan, because Al-Haq Foundation was among those organizations that struggled since, I think, late 1990s on the question of accountability using several platform, including universal jurisdiction. But unfortunately, the situation has not improved. There is still lack of political will among major international powers to intervene, to stop Israel from this violation, committing this violation. And also here is a question that may be addressed also by next speakers, the responsibilities of third states who are complicit directly or indirectly in the conflict and in supporting Israel and the war machine of Israel. I will move now to Shawan Jabbarin, and as I said, Al-Haq Foundation was among those organizations that playing a leading role on the question of accountability, using all platform of United Nations Human Rights Council, political tools, legal tools. So we looking forward also to hear from Shawan his views on the situation and what is the solution that could be realized in order to stop this crisis and to address the question of accountability. So please, Mr. Shawan.
Thank you so much, Mu'taz, and I would like to thank Muwatana for organizing this event, and it's a great pleasure to be with Kenneth, you, Mu'taz, and Radiyya, and also other speakers. I will be focused on specific points. 10 minutes, I will try to use it well. One, the history, it hasn't started in October 7th. That's one main point. But also October 7th, I think it needs to be investigated well, thoroughly by independent body. One of that is the ICC. One of that is also the commission and what's happened exactly. And no crime justify another crime. I completely agree with Kenneth on what he said. And the principles is clear, in that the problem is not in the texts, and the problem is not in the norms. The problem is not in all of these things. Another thing is the humanitarian law and also international law. It's not a Palestinian invention. This came, as a lessons were learned from horrific atrocities committed during the Second World War. This came, from that, and even before. It was developed at that time. And that time when it was developed, they took in their account the civilians as the main things, because many things improved, developed, even the weapons since that time. I think the problem is not in the text again, but the question is the culture of impunity that Israel, they have been, feeling. This is the culture of impunity. No one actions were taken against Israel since 48 until today, and they commit, crimes against civilians, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And these days, and even before, we used to say this is an apartheid regime. This is not just, and this is not just Al-Haq saying this or Palestinian organization, but this is the conclusion. And under his leadership, even Mr. Kenneth, also the Human Rights Watch, they concluded this. And I think this is a big thing. It's not an easy or small thing. And the work in human rights, you have not to be selective. Work in law and legal field, you have not to be selective. What the Israelis doing is they are selective. When it comes to anything, any incident, any claim, any accusation, anything like that, if they dislike it, it's easy to accuse you that anti-Semitic. It's easy to accuse, anybody, any person, any. And if you agree with their crimes and support them, for instance, you become their friends. Even if you are real anti-Semitic, even if you become also real anti-Semitic. And I know what's the friends of Netanyahu in Eastern Europe, who are there, his friends here or there. Because of that, I can say we have to look at the things and put it also in the context. This is a settler colonial regime. And when I say regime, it doesn't mean that you have to dissolve everybody and push, people here or there. No, the regime, the racist one, the colonial, that's what we mean. And this is what we call when we say dissolve even the apartheid regime. Everything is clear. Building an occupied territory and transfer civilians from the occupying power state to the occupied territory. This is a war crime. This is great breach according to the international humanitarian law. More than that, what's happened after October 7th, the statements that also said by the Israeli officials and the Israeli leaders, it was clear. Human animals, what they said regarding, the also to cut off water completely, to cut off any medical assistance, any humanitarian assistance. It's clear. This shows also their intention in a clear way. And I think the Israelis, they made our life easy. The Israeli officials, the Israeli leaders, they made our life easy when it comes to the characterizing the crimes and their work in Gaza. It's clear. And since the first days, I was concerned about the genocide. And they said it will be exceeded even, which called the international humanitarian law and war crimes and things like this. They are going to commit a genocide. And that was clear, materially speaking, after that, from their actions, targeting civilians, as Ken said, and more than that, targeting even the medical hospitals, others, systematically, intentionally. Even when the tunnel mentioned by Kenneth under the Shifa, it wasn't built before the occupation. It was built during the occupation, and the Ehud Barak, he mentioned this issue. The Israelis, they built it. The Israelis, they built it when they were in Gaza. That's the case. And they know where to go, and they found nothing. That's the case. But in the same time, they targeted the hospitals for one main political reasons: to cut off any life in Gaza and to push Palestinians outside for political reasons, to transfer Palestinians again. That's the main political things, which is also clear. This is clear from their statements. Ben Gvir is one, Smotrich others, all of them, they used to make also clear statements. This time is everything is clear. And here it's not just about, the making or committing mistakes here by dropping. No. This is part of the systematic. This is part of decision. This is part of the plan. This is part of the plan. And now when they are targeting in Rafah, this is part of the plan. This is how we look at it. I can accept, one time things done, collateral damage here or there, it's okay, but not to target civilians. And when it came also to the artificial intelligence things, they are not targeting the persons. They are targeting their families. And they know well that they kill their families. And they, more than that, they can identify who is living in this house or that house, how many children in each house. And when they push Palestinians from northern side of Gaza to the southern side, means also that the people, they will gather together. The families, the relatives, they will come, and every maybe house you find, instead of space for 10, it will be 100 persons. This is also shows the numbers they were killed. That's the case. Anyway, I think if the ICC proceeded early, I don't know if the Israelis, they will commit their crimes in this way. Because of that, I blame the ICC. Everything, it was before them, long time ago. And they have a jurisdiction to go after the criminals. Even the minimum, it's the settlements. But they didn't do. Anyway, they proceeded now, and they have to, I think they will continue. They will continue in that. This is the first round. I wish they go also against others when it comes also in West Bank. What's going on also in West Bank? I call it, this is not fully a pure legal term, but also in the West Bank, there is a slow genocide going on. And when I use genocide, I use the legal term. It's not a political term. I know that the Israelis, they are furious. They refuse this one. But this is the label. This is unprecedented case. And it's just, I would like to take just one example, is what's happened against the hospitals and against the medical centers. By itself, it says a lot that it's unprecedented case ever in the history when it comes to the one type of the crime. This is, the case, and this is the issue. Now with the ICJ, I can say since the beginning, I wrote to Mahmoud Abbas on 15th of October. I said to him, Palestine is state party of the genocide treaty. Could you please go as Palestine And we set on 13th, and before that we set also which called the Genocide Working Group, including many academics, expertise on genocide and Holocaust. That's now their number more than 80 persons in this group. And they became, discussing and exchanging ideas, translating things, sharing their experience and their academics knowledge. And I think they developed good ideas. At the end, the idea is the third state party to take this case. And thank you for South Africa that they did it. And now it's before the ICJ. We'll see, how we'll proceed. I will not go in details about this thing, but the ICC also, another example, also at the national level, we do believe that also those they have jurisdiction over war crimes and the crimes against humanity, they can proceed. More than that, the state parties in the genocide treaty, also they have to take actions. I think what's missing in all of these things is the actions, taking actions, and to stand behind these values. Now the people, they ask questions, the public. Wow, what's about this international law? If you apply it selectively, it's applied, for instance, in this case, but it doesn't apply in this case. You go after this person, but you don't go after the other one, even if they commit the same crimes. Why? On which basis? More than that, the complicity. I will leave the complicity for other colleagues, but I can do believe that Biden's administration, they are complicit in a genocide taking place in Palestine these days. Since the beginning, our children, they killed by their weapons until today. What's happened also in Rafah, it's their weapons also. More than that, they were part of the plan at the beginning. At the beginning, they part of the plan. They planned and they support, the military officers, others, commanders also, they came and they used to know everything about even the plans, the tactics that they use. I don't know if they participated personally or not, but what we heard also from which called the former national security person at that time, when he said that Americans also, they were killed at the beginning. This shows something. The Germans, they are complicit with the war crimes and the crimes against humanity and genocide taking place by also providing. The Brits, it's the same. That's the case. And here the people, they feel, and I think the message that they are sending, these countries, they are sending to the people to say, hey guys, if you want to invest in something, you have to invest in power. You have to strengthen and to build your power. This is risky. This is a dangerous thing for the future. More than that, I think the international system to protect civilians, and here I can say about the Security Council, who is in charge and responsible for security and peace. This system failed. I can say this international system failed 100%. It doesn't protect civilians. It doesn't protect civilians. The only thing left from this system now, and the hope isn't there, is the judiciary system. ICJ, ICC, the accountability system. This is very important, and we have not to let this system collapse. Even if there are American and also other Western countries, they play, now pressure. They put pressure on this system to broken it, to paralyze it. When they push and pressure even the prosecutor himself, what's happened yesterday, what's released yesterday by the Guardian, to be honest with you, I wasn't surprised from anything in that report, except one thing. I didn't know that the Mossad, the director of Mossad himself, he spoke directly and he tried to pressure bin Suda to push her back. I finish by saying that there is no political will to act according law and to take actions according law. And the problem is there. It's not in the international humanitarian law, it's not in the international human rights law, and it's not also in the international criminal law. It's not there. The problem in some other areas. It's in the political will and also by the superpowers. And even when some of them, they said to the prosecutor, this is what he said, that the ICC, it's for the Africans and for others, but it's not for the superpowers. I think we have to change, and we put a hope on the peoples and in the young generation because they are standing in a right square. The question is how to maintain hope in their minds regarding the international law and the human rights, justice, and these principles. I think this is the main challenge facing us all these days. I don't want to say a global south and a global north, but this is the reality. But I can say is the global world. This is how I look at it. When I look at the people and the public, and I can say the hope is coming from there. We will not lose our hope, and we will not step back, even fighting for the implementation and respect of international law with all of these difficulties, because this is the only way to protect people. But with the change of the political will and the political regimes, those they are complicit. Because of that, not just the Israelis has to be the ones, bringing them before courts, but those they were complicit. In this case, I think we have to go after them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shawan. Yes, the fight for justice and accountability in Palestine, it is part or at the heart of the fight for the global human rights regime and consistency of this human rights regime. I'd like also to remind our audience that Shawan and Al-Haq and the other Palestinian human rights defenders have been punished many years ago, or some few years ago, when they started their work on the ICC and accountability. They faced threat and intimidation, surveillance, and their organization were declared terrorist organizations. So this question of accountability is crucial in the agenda of the Palestinian human rights organization. But now moving to the perspective from the Arab human rights movement, and we have Radia Al-Mutawakkil, the founder and the president of Muwatna for Human Rights. Radia and Muwatna has been working in a conflict zone, and they have long-standing experience in documenting human rights abuses and violation committed in conflict zone. The question of Palestine also has been at the heart of the human rights movement in the Arab region since many years. So we would like also to hear from Radia how she sees the situation and the prospect for international community intervention in the situation, the role of third parties, the arm export to Israel, and how she thinks the human rights movement in the Arab region can play a role in supporting and helping Palestinian colleague in this situation. So go ahead, Ravi.
Thank you, Mu'taz. From our experience in Yemen, when we started to document war crimes and violations by all parties to the conflict in Yemen, and started to do like advocacy internationally, we knew that the whole world is designed in a way that enhances impunity more than accountability. But we have learned also from our work that that is not a destiny. It is a situation that can be changed. So impunity, it's not a destiny. And I am coming from the country that is called the worst humanitarian and human rights crisis in the world, man-made crisis. And I'm telling you that what's happening in Gaza is exceptional. It never happened anywhere else. It is not only a genocide that is happening, it is also very visible. It's happening in front of our eyes. And it is like from our experience, it's very clear that war crimes are contagious. And parties to the conflict, they learn from each other. And the more they trust impunity, the more they become aggressive. So Gaza now is the lab for all the world. If the genocide and war crimes that are happening in Gaza were let to go with no accountability, then this is not only against the rights of civilians in Palestine, it will just create a very scary world. It's scary, it scares me as a person who lives in a conflict zone, because it's gonna be like a green light for all parties to the conflict to commit more violations while they know that they will never be accountable. And we know that most of the wars happening in the world and most of the violations are very preventable. Parties to the conflict, they commit these war crimes and violations because they don't care. They know they will not be held accountable. And this is increasing, and it's increasing in a very, I mean, crazy way in Gaza. So Gaza now, it's the lab for all people to create the change. And as Mr. Shawan, he said that we should keep the hope. I know that if there were accountability in Syria, then there will not be like war crimes in Yemen. There will not be crime in Sudan. There will not be war crimes in Ukraine and Palestine. So yes, more impunity, less accountability. It encouraged more war crimes everywhere. And now, if there was no accountability in Gaza, while we have the platforms in order to go forward to do actions, real actions against those who are committing violations, then I can't even imagine how the world is going to be after Gaza. Even hypocrisy will not work after Gaza. Even like every war crime leader or every war leader will be another Netanyahu. Even Putin, even Putin is gonna be more confident with impunity, because this is how it goes. Now with Gaza, we have many things that can be done. That can be done by not only people but also states. If we think that Biden administration might be a hopeless case because they are supporting Netanyahu 100% and supporting, I mean, clearly all the violations and genocide and war crimes are happening, I still cannot be very, I mean, hopeless with the EU. The EU can still play a very big and major role when it comes to accountability and to when it comes to stop the war that's happening in Gaza now. So we have, as Mr. Shawan said, we have now two very important platforms, which is the ICC. And thank you for all the civil and human rights movement that established the ICC. Thank you for the Palestinian human rights movement that made like Palestine part of the ICC. And now the ICC, we know that they are threatened by Israel. They should be supported by states. They should be supported. The ICC should, and its officials and judges should be supported financially and politically and logistically. This is like one thing that I will say that EU countries can do and easily. Also, yes, it is thank you for South Africa for doing like this step regarding the ICG, but why only South Africa until now? Why we don't have other states, not only EU states, but also Arab states standing beside South South Africa in this. Why we don't see more states? More states should engage and play like a major role when it comes to what's happening in Palestine through the ICG. It is a platform that is very available and it can be used easily. The problem that none of the states now in the world they can do that. We have done everything in order to stop the genocide or war crimes that is happening in Gaza and Rafah, because the very available peaceful avenues and platforms are not used. The EU can do also that. More EU countries can join Norway, Ireland, and Spain, like to recognize the Palestinian state and to guarantee like full membership for Palestine. This will just guarantee the very basic rights for Palestinians, even in peace-like situation. If can like the situation in Palestine can be called peace at any time. So this will also encourage in the future the steps towards sustainable peace. Arms trade export to Israel should stop by EU countries. Diplomatic relations should stop. Sanctions should be used. All international platforms should be used. The General Assembly, the UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council, the International Court, the Universal Jurisdiction. All these are very available mechanisms and avenues for states to use. And I believe, as Mr. Shawan said, I believe in people all over the world. They are now doing their best to push, whether in the US or Europe and all other world. And as Mr. Ken said at the beginning, the international humanitarian law is very clear, and there is no act can justify the other act. This is like a very basic principle when it comes to the international humanitarian law, and it was brought to the discussion again as it is like a surprise. No, again and again, whoever you are, whoever you think the right is with you or not with you, you should protect civilians as a party to the conflict, and you should not commit war crimes, and you should not commit even violations. So with this principle with this like principle that is very clear, we can all push to respect the international humanitarian law, and not only to stop the war in Gaza. It's not only about to stop the war in Gaza. It's not only about preparation. It's also about accountability. When I talk about accountability, I mean criminal accountability. I'm saying this not only for Gaza, I'm saying this for myself. I don't know how the situation is going to be in Yemen, in Sudan, in Ukraine, in any conflict zone now in the future, if the war crimes and genocide in Gaza will let go with any accountability. This is Gaza is a lab, and it is not like the hope is very huge in order to make a real difference and to change the whole world from enhancing impunity to practicing criminal accountability. And thank you.
Thank you, Radia. We will open now the floor for questions, and I received already some questions. I will just, before I read this question, I have a point that I'd like to raise concerning the state responsibility of third parties. And we have been following the case Nicaragua versus Germany. So I would like also to hear your views, Ken and Shawan, on this case and its future direction, especially that the provisional order were dismissed by the court. So what is the possibility of having these kind of cases and how it can be successful? Because Shawan was talking about complicity. So is there like a chance for having strong litigation against states that who are supporting Israel with arm and are complicit in the violation? I will read now some of the question here. There is a question from Harun. What is the slow genocide in West Bank? So this is, I think, for Shawan. just to elaborate on this, the slow genocide in the West Bank. Harun, also another question. It's the same. It is the same. It is the same question. There are violations for international humanitarian law. The question is, where is the accountability and the effectiveness of accountability? Maybe I can add here something that despite the fact that the position of many European states have changed, I mean, since October until now, there are changes also in the formal discourse of many European countries, but this have not been yet reflected on the ground. It seems that United States continue to plays a major role in obstructing any move to end the conflict. But how you see this situation? I mean, the change in European position, the latest recognition of the Palestinian state, how this can be reflected on the political situation and to halt the atrocities and to actually achieve ceasefire, comprehensive ceasefire. This is, I think, the only solution that is needed urgently. Another question also, is it the time that the global human rights civil society organization and the other would push to amend the system of the United Nations to activate justice and to allow all countries would have a say and not only powerful 5 countries. So this is a question on the structural reform that is needed to the global human rights regime and the international order. So Antilak here raised a question on the Security Council and the proposal to reform Security Council, and do we need this? And if this happen, will this achieve some kind of progress in the application of human rights and the enforcement of human rights, or it would not? This is also another debate. There is a debate on that. And what kind of direction needed to reform the international world order? So these are the questions which I received so far. There is another question in Arabic. كيف يمكن أن تتضاعف جهود الضغط على إسرائيل من أجل عدم اقتحام جنودها لرفح? So the question here is how pressure can be generated on Israel to hold its operation in Rafah. So it is similar, the similar point. I mean, last week also the ICJ ordered Israel to halt its operation in Rafah, but just following the decision, we saw that Israel continued its crime, and on Sunday we all shocked of what happened for the refugees of the displaced person camp in Rafah. So it seems that Israel just openly challenged the ICJ and openly challenged the international community and the order to hold its operation in Rafah. So I will give the floor to a second round of comment. Maybe we can start with Ken.
Okay. I mean, these are good questions. Let me try to address some of them. Now, first of all, I think the interesting case in terms of looking at, the potential liability of the people, the countries that are arming Israel. The interesting case is the Charles Taylor case. Now, this may be ancient history to people, but Charles Taylor was the former president of Liberia. And he was convicted by a quasi-international court. It was called the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And his conviction was for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity because he sold arms to a very abusive rebel group in Sierra Leone. And based on that conviction, Charles Taylor is currently serving a 50-year prison term in a British prison. So this is, a very clear precedent. Now, the difficulty is that the principal arms supplier to the Israeli government today is the United States. And the court that could charge that is the International Criminal Court, and it's not going to happen. So I just say that this is, a legal possibility, but it's not a practical possibility. Karim Khan is not going to go after Joe Biden. But, it does speak to the importance of political pressure on Joe Biden, because, one of the questions was, what would it take to stop the invasion of Rafah? It would take Joe Biden stopping the arms flow, and he's done that with the 2,000-pound bombs. He suspended those, but at the same time, he allowed $1 billion in arms to go forward. He said, I'll stop the arms if Israel crosses my red line in Rafah. But to this day, he says they haven't done that. There's not a full-scale invasion of Rafah. He says even though 1 million of the 1.4 million people sheltering in Rafah have fled. But that's the source of pressure. Now, there's a question about, Europe, and I do think that this recognition of a Palestinian state by Ireland, Norway, and Spain, who joined Sweden, which had already done that. This is significant. It's not going to change facts on the ground. It's not like, Shawan can suddenly, run around in a free country. But it does, I think, have influence around the International Criminal Court case, because one of Israel's challenges to the ICC jurisdiction will be to say that Palestine isn't a real state. It's not a sufficient state to join the ICC. And the more governments that recognize Palestine as a state, the better in responding to that. I don't think it's necessary in the sense that Palestine was recognized already by the UN General Assembly as a non-member observer state. And the pretrial chamber of the ICC already ruled that that was sufficient to allow Palestine to join the court, just as Palestine has joined various human rights treaties. But the more governments that recognize Palestine as a state, the weaker that defense by Israel will become. Now, a couple more points. There have been a few references to the International Court of Justice's decision last week with respect to Rafah. And, sadly, that was a weaker order than people are saying, because it didn't just say, don't invade Rafah. It said, don't invade Rafah insofar as that implicates the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. So it was a conditional order. And Israel's response was to say, we're not going to jeopardize people's rights under the Genocide Convention. They just as they said they hadn't done that to date, regardless of, the many atrocities they've committed. So it kind of, created room for Israel to pretend that it's complying when it isn't really doing anything different. And that's a problem with the way the court worded the order. It was obviously deliberate. It was either done because that's what was necessary to get the large 13-2 majority supporting the decision, or it may have been that the court is just aware that it's a weak institution, it has no police force, so it just wanted to stick to the language of the Genocide Convention. It's hard to know, but that order was weaker than it might have been. Now, there's a question about the international system. And, let's not overstate the problem. I understand there are lots of problems with the Security Council, but the ICC does have jurisdiction over, any crime by Palestinians or any crime in Palestine. So the Security Council is not a problem here. It was more a problem, say, in Syria, where the ICC does not have jurisdiction, despite the mass atrocities there. It doesn't have jurisdiction in Yemen. It doesn't have jurisdiction in China, where the Chinese government has been, detaining and persecuting millions of Uyghur Muslims, to force them to abandon Islam, their language, and their culture. So there are big problems out there where there is no ICC jurisdiction because the relevant country has never ratified the court, and the Security Council will not refer jurisdiction. So there are problems here. It's just fortunately not a problem with respect to the crimes being committed in Palestine.
Thank you. The colleagues told me that the video of Ioni Bilara is ready. I will perhaps I will ask Shawan and Radia. You can intervene until the colleagues just prepare it, and then we will listen to the intervention. So Shawan, please go ahead. You are muted.
راح أتحدث باللغة العربية، وكينيث تقدر تحط السماعات إذا في مجال. شفت أسئلة كمان بالعربي. أنا برأيي فيما يتصل بموضوع دور مجلس الأمن. الآن أنا مع فكرة أخذ الموضوع مرة ثانية أمام مجلس الأمن، ونشوف إذا أمريكا بتحترم محكمة العدل الدولية أم لا في طلبها الوقف الفوري للعمليات العسكرية، إلا إذا بدها تدمر ما تبقى من المنظومة بشكل كامل. أنا مع الفكرة لهناك، ولكن بالمقابل أنا مع فكرة فرنسا اللي كانت قبل كذا سنة، إنه أمام مجلس الأمن عندما يبحث يجب أن الآن تغير المنظومة وتحدث والإصلاح يتم. أنا مقتنع إنه المنظومة اللي إجت بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية ومجلس الأمن والقوى العظمى والخمسة اللي لهم الفيتو، هذا انتهى. يجب أن ينتهي هذا الموضوع، ويجب أن نكون إزاء منظومة أخرى أكثر عدالة وأكثر قوة ومرتبطة بموضوع العدالة والحقوق. لذلك عندما يناقش أي شيء له علاقة بالجرائم الدولية زي جرائم الحرب، جرائم ضد الإنسانية، وجريمة الإبادة، يجب أن لا يستخدم نهائيا الفيتو مطلق. يجب أن يعطل الفيتو أمام نقاش موضوع الجرائم الدولية. هذه نقطة أنا برأيي يجب أن يدفع بها الآن المجتمع المدني بشكل جمعي، والجميع يدفع باتجاهها. سيكون صعب، اللي عنده منطق القوة وعنده منطق الفيتو أكيد مش راح يتنازل عن الموضوع ومش راح يسلم بهذه القضايا، ولكن هذا أكبر خطر في أيامنا الحالية. النقطة الثانية كمان تفعيل القضاء الوطني. نحن أخذنا قضية على قاعدة اتفاقية الإبادة ومسؤولية بايدن ووزير خارجيته ووزير دفاعه أمام المحكمة الأمريكية في أوكلاند في كاليفورنيا، وكنا جزء يعني من هاي القضية. والشيء اللي كان ممتاز رائع إنه القاضي استمع وفسح المجال للضحايا والشهود وغيره، ولكن قال بالنهاية لأسباب تقنية، لأن هيك النظام الأمريكي، قال لتكنيكال يعني المسائل التقنية لا أستطيع أني أستمر، ولكن كرر ما قالته الاي سي جي في بعض الكلمات والمصطلحات. والآن القضية هي أمام الاستئناف، نأمل أن يؤخذ بهذا الأمر. الشيء الآخر موضوع التحفظ من قبل الدول على دور محكمة العدل الدولية بالنظر في موضوع المخاصمات ما بين الدول أو التفسير في بعض المواد للاتفاقيات. أنا برأيي هذا كمان موضوع خطير. يعني أمريكا تختبئ خلف مسألة إنها الاي سي جي هي وضعت تحفظات على دور محكمة العدل الدولية. هذا موضوع، ولذلك هو يكشف اليوم عن عيوب هذا النظام وهذه المنظومة، لأن في هناك سوء النية وفي هناك عدم الالتزام وعدم الاحترام. يعني القانون الدولي مصنوع لمجموعة ما، وإذا بخدمني وبخدمنيش انتقائيا. ولذلك هذا يكون نقاش على المستوى العالمي والمستوى الدولي اللي تحمله دول محترمة زي جنوب أفريقيا. الجنوب عموما، الجنوب مهمل. الجنوب هو كان مكان للعبودية، ومكان لاستغلال الموارد الطبيعية، ومكان لعمليات تجريب الأسلحة في الجنوب مشان تزويد هذا الجهة أو ذاك، والقتل والدمار وعملية التدمير. لذلك أنا برأيي حان الوقت أن نلتفت جنوبا. وخطأنا الأساسي كمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان في المنطقة العربية أننا بقينا ننظر غربا وشمالا، ولم ننظر جنوبا في هذا الموضوع وشرقا. فأنا برأيي هذه مسألة أساسية يجب أن ننظر الآن في إعادة استراتيجياتنا، علاقاتنا كذا، لأنه بالنهاية هذه حياتنا وإحنا مستمرين فيها، وفي أبنائنا وفي أحفادنا وللمستقبل البعيد، ونؤمن أنها للجميع وليست لأحد. ولكن الدول، وأنا برأيي ما تثبت أمريكا كإدارة أمريكية كانت في ترامب سابقا ولا اليوم بايدن، أنها دولة يعني نزوعها نزوع لا قانوني وغير محترم وفاشي بمعنى من المعاني، لا يهمها أي شيء وأي قيم. ولذلك اليوم بنشوف موضوع الحركة الطلابية هناك أمل كبير يأتي من الحركة الطلابية هناك. حتى كنث عندما تحدث في بعض المسائل كانوا يقولوا له روح من الجامعة، واللي وقف هناك وقف الناس اللي تؤمن بموضوع حرية التعبير وهذه القيم وكل هذه الأمور. ولذلك أقول في هناك أمل كبير. هذه معركة مستمرة لن تتم غدا، والفلسطينيين حتى في موضوع الاعتراف بالدولة هذا موضوع رمزي له قيمة رمزية، ولكن القيمة العملية لاحقا إذا يقرن هذا الأمر بأفعال وخطوات عملية، منها فرض العقوبات، ومنها موضوع حيلولة إسرائيل دون ممارسة الشعب الفلسطيني لحقه في تقرير المصير. أمريكا عندما تصوت ضد حق تقرير المصير للشعب الفلسطيني بالجمعية العامة شيء مخزي. طب ما هذا القيمة وهذا المبدأ دفعوا فيه الأمريكان، يعني الأمريكان كانوا بوقفوا وراه بشكل قوي حق تقرير المصير. أنا برأيي اليوم قاعدين بتنكروا لهذه القيم ولهذه المسائل. لذلك الموضوع طويل، مشوارنا طويل، ولكن أقول الصحوة بدأت والأمور بدأت. سئل هناك سؤال حول موضوع الإبادة بالضفة الغربية. أنا استعملتها مجازا بهذا الموضوع مش بالمعنى التقني الكامل، ولكن ما يجري هنا من تصريحات الوزراء الإسرائيليين المتحكمين الآن في الميدان في الإدارة المدنية وغيرها، الذين يقولون بشكل يومي يجب أن لا يبقى الفلسطينيين في أرضهم، وبالتالي عمليات القتل هي جزء من المعادلة. وعندما يقول سموتريتش أن هناك 3 خيارات أمام الفلسطينيين: إما يقبلوا بالتنازل في فكرهم وعقلهم وكل شيء ووجدانهم عن هويتهم والحديث عن الحقوق الجماعية، إذا ما بدهم يتنازلوا ويصيروا يتعاملوا هون كأفراد مش كشعب. النقطة الثانية أمامهم خيار يطلعوا وإحنا بنوفر لهم كمان الفيز وبنعطيهم شوية مصاري مشان يطلعوا برا البلد، يعني التهجير ببساطة لهم. أو إذا بدهم مش لا الخيار الأول ولا الثاني، الجيش تاعنا حيتعامل معهم قتلا. يعني هذا المنطق، وهو الآن يقوم بذلك في مصادرة الأرض، موضوع تسليح المستوطنين، موضوع القتل اليومي للفلسطينيين على كل شيء. يعني اليوم موضوع القتل عملية، يعني الجندي لما بيسحب سلاحه سيقتل. اليوم القتل يعني بيتم بال10 وبال8 وبال15 بالضفة الغربية بشكل شبه يومي. عمليات التعذيب اللي قاعدة بتصير، فبالتالي هناك في استهداف للجماعة، هناك استهداف للشعب الفلسطيني. ولذلك أنا برأيي هذا أنا بتحدث عنه بشكل يومي، بقول هناك في إبادة كذلك. إذا بدناش نقول عنه إبادة بنقول جرائم الحرب اللي بتصير، وبنقول كمان التطهير العرقي اللي قاعد بصير. فالموضوع جاي هناك شو في آفاق. أنا متفائل إنه دم أطفال غزة حركت الضمير الإنساني وحركت الشارع وحركت الجيل الجديد الصغير الآن يقف في مربع صحيح، وكشفت الوجه الشنيع والبشع مضمون طبيعة هذا الاحتلال وهذا الاستعمار الاستيطاني في فلسطين. المشكلة ليست مع اليهود، المشكلة مطلقا المشكلة مع جسم سياسي، مع منظومة سياسية صهيونية بهذا الموضوع. ولذلك المسألة هناك، القصة هناك. وأنا برأيي هذا يعني متفائل، رغم أنه الثمن كبير، موجع جدا جدا وبشكل عميق، ولكن متفائل بالبعيد عندما بشوف التحولات. وأنا جيت قبل يومين من رحلة حوالي 35 يوم لحوالي 7 بلدان مختلفة، منها أوروبية، منها آسيوية، ومنها أفريقية. كانت لمست حالة الوعي والنهضة في هذا الموضوع التي يجب أن يبنى عليها، لأنه تكريس السابقة السيئة جدا جدا في موضوع القبول بالإبادة الجماعية وجرائم الحرب والجرائم ضد الإنسانية في فلسطين ستكون خطرا على الإنسانية في المستقبل في أي مكان آخر، لأنها ستنتقل في إطار التجارب. يعني حتى إسرائيل اليوم عندما تقول للأمريكان أنكم قمتم كذا وكذا وكذا ضد السكان الأصليين، يعني كأنه هذا يبرر لها العمل الذي تقوم به. وبالتالي السوابق السيئة هي خطيرة جدا على الإنسانية، يجب أن لا نسمح بها، ويجب أن نعمل كل جهدنا في هذا المجال.
شكرا. راديا، لو في تعليقات.
Thank you. I was informed that there is now a session about Palestine in the Security Council, and therefore the Biden administration should not use its vote again to prevent any serious action towards Palestine. And I hope that we will see like a resolution that asks clearly to stop the war in Gaza. For the future, yes, this vote system should be changed. I agree with Mr. Shawan, but for now, the US should not use its vote again against any resolution that ask to stop or order to stop the war in Gaza. This is what I want to say for now.
Thank you. I just also want to say that in March 2024, this year, at the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Council asked the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the OBT to address the responsibility of third parties. So we expect a report from the Commission, I think early next year on this question, the responsibility of third parties, their responsibilities in providing arms sales and the transfer of arms. So I think this is very important, that there is also this awareness within the UN human rights system on the responsibility of states which aid and abet human rights abuses committed in occupied Palestinian territories. So right now we will listen to the recorded intervention shared by Ms. Iuni Pilara, member of the parliament from Spain, and she recorded this to the webinar. She couldn't be with us, so I invite our colleagues to start.
Para lograr poner coto a la criminalización. Buenos días a todos y todas. En primer lugar, quiero expresar mi agradecimiento a Moatana for Human Rights por la organización de un panel tan necesario como este. Y expresar mi agradecimiento también porque hayáis pensado en mí y en mi partido como partícipes en el mismo. Es para nosotras un honor. Pensamos que la celebración de este tipo de actos son imprescindibles para lograr poner coto a la criminalización y el silenciamiento al que habitualmente los grandes medios de comunicación someten a quienes nos posicionamos en defensa del pueblo palestino y del respeto a los derechos humanos. Esta semana hemos conocido que el fiscal jefe de la Corte Penal Internacional, el señor Karim Khan, ha solicitado a la Corte que emita por fin órdenes de detención contra Benjamin Netanyahu y contra su ministro de Defensa, Yoav Gallant, acusados de crímenes de guerra y crímenes contra la humanidad. Es una petición que llega tarde, pero que es justa y coherente con lo que está sucediendo. Desde nuestra formación llevamos meses solicitando que se emitan estas órdenes lo antes posible. Llevamos demasiados meses viendo cómo Israel actúa de forma despiadada y genocida contra el pueblo palestino, sintiendo como propio el dolor de ese pueblo hermano que está siendo sometido al peor de los castigos y viendo con impotencia cómo el Estado de Israel no solo no está sufriendo consecuencia penal alguna, sino que está siendo respaldado en su actuación por grandes potencias mundiales como los Estados Unidos o la Unión Europea. Ya es hora de que la justicia internacional empiece a operar en consecuencia y a establecer medidas que señalen a estas personas como lo que son, genocidas y criminales de guerra, que están cometiendo las peores atrocidades contra un pueblo indefenso. Medidas que sean efectivas para frenar de una vez por todas los crímenes en Gaza y poner fin al genocidio. En este tiempo hemos visto cómo han tenido que ser países del sur global, como Sudáfrica o Colombia, los que han liderado la reacción internacional en defensa del pueblo palestino. Mientras aquellos países que siempre presumen de abanderar el mundo libre, Estados Unidos, el Reino Unido o la Unión Europea, han sido cómplices de lo que Israel ha hecho desde el 7 de octubre hasta la fecha, con la excusa falaz del derecho a la defensa y con el manido argumento de que Israel es la única democracia de Oriente Medio, un país amigo de nuestras democracias. Todo esto ha justificado y ha legitimado los crímenes de Israel. No podemos permitir que esto siga ocurriendo ni un día más. La justicia internacional tiene que actuar ya y garantizar al pueblo de Palestina la protección, la defensa legal y el futuro que hasta ahora le están negando nuestros respectivos países, para vergüenza y escarnio de nuestros pueblos, pueblos en Europa que siempre han estado comprometidos con la paz, particularmente el pueblo de nuestro país, España, que siempre ha abanderado el no a la guerra. Queremos recordarle a nuestros gobiernos, como así lo están haciendo también miles de estudiantes universitarios en acampadas por todo el mundo, que los criminales no tienen amigos, tienen cómplices y que con sus actos se están convirtiendo en cómplices de un genocidio. Aquí en España tenemos un gobierno que se está dedicando a dar grandes titulares, diferenciándose, es verdad, en algunas cuestiones de otros países aliados de Israel, pero que a la hora de la verdad no hace nada útil, nada concreto para ejercer presión contra Israel y contribuir a que se ponga fin al genocidio lo antes posible. Nosotras llevamos meses pidiendo que se lleve a cabo una ruptura clara de relaciones diplomáticas, un embargo real de la compraventa de armas a Israel, sumarnos a Sudáfrica en su denuncia ante la Corte Internacional de Justicia o establecer sanciones contra Israel y sus dirigentes, al igual que se ha hecho en el caso de Rusia y los suyos. Nada de esto ha sido atendido por nuestro gobierno. Nada de esto se ha hecho en más de 7 meses de genocidio. De hecho, la semana pasada hemos sabido que nuestro país se está utilizando habitualmente como ruta para el envío de armas hacia Israel y que hasta ahora lo tenían oculto. El gobierno quiere ahora hacer un reconocimiento del Estado de Palestina y hace bandera pública de ello, algo que sin duda simbólicamente es importante, pero que el presidente Sánchez debería haber hecho hace mucho tiempo, pero que en estos momentos creemos que no es suficiente. Si ese reconocimiento no va acompañado de algunas de estas otras medidas, no servirá más que para que el gobierno se lave la cara ante la opinión pública, no para pararle los pies a Netanyahu. Lo que está ocurriendo es demasiado grave como para seguir haciendo titulares sin contenido. Como ha dicho recientemente el presidente Petro, la causa palestina es hoy en día la causa de la humanidad. Israel no solo está arrasando de la forma más cruel con el pueblo palestino, está arrasando también con los consensos y las normas de derecho internacional humanitario que los países del mundo se dieron a sí mismos después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Si Israel consigue su objetivo de acabar con el pueblo palestino y culminar la colonización de sus tierras, el mundo no volverá jamás a ser el mismo. Se habrá acabado cualquier posibilidad de un mundo y un orden internacional basado en reglas. Se habrá permitido que el crimen, el robo de un país entero, el genocidio y el exterminio sean admisibles para la comunidad internacional como formas de actuación política válida. Y por eso debemos emplear todas nuestras fuerzas para detener este genocidio. Y si eso ocurre, todos los países del mundo estarán amenazados por la guerra, la muerte y la violencia genocida. Hoy es Palestina, pero mañana podrá ser cualquier otro, y nadie, entonces, podrá hacer nada por evitarlo.
We thank Ms. Ioni Pilara for this strong solidarity message and also comment on different angle of the situation. And I think it is a good speech to conclude our webinar today. I think it was very strong and insightful discussion from our distinguished speakers. We will continue to grapple with this situation over the coming period. I think the major priority right now is to find a way to end the war. Ceasefire, I think, is the most pressing priority, and it will need lots of political engagement, lots of pressure from international, local, regional human rights organizations, but also role for governments in Western societies, in international actors, but also in the Arab region. I think Arab government need to do more. There are lots of diplomatic means and leverage that can be used to pressure Israel supporter in order to press for ceasefire. And then the question of accountability, the future of the international human rights regime, all of these issues, I think will continue with us. What happened since October until now is a reminder for the limitations, the structural limitation of the international human rights system, and especially for the protection of civilians in conflict zone. I would like to thank our speaker, thank Muwatna for Human Rights for organizing this event, and I also thank Mr. Kinisros, Mr. Shahwan Jabbareen, and Ms. Radia Al-Mutawakkil, and of course for Yoni Belara also for her recorded intervention. And thanks for our audience today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.